Welcome to Life Group. Welcome to week 2 of Galatians. I trust last week was loads of fun, and you're starting to believe that, in fact, you can enjoy this letter, and that you're getting to know our friend Paul and these poor folk in the province of Galatia who he's taking a shot at. What we're moving on into this week is chapter 2. I trust you've had a chance to read it already, and if you have, you'll notice that mostly it's a story. Paul's telling a personal story about himself and another church leader called Peter. So Paul and Peter have this kind of moment together, and Paul tells the story to make a point. I'd like to tell you a parallel story to maybe make this a little more modern day and bring it a little closer to home. So in place of Peter, I want you to think of Ross Roger. You may know him. He leads our church. And in place of Paul the Apostle, put Paul the fellow who runs Kloof. And imagine this. And this is actually true. Imagine that Ross has been leading a church for a while. Successful ministry. It's going well. God's hand seems to be on him. In fact, in Peter's case, he knew Jesus face to face. That's quite a thing. Ross can't quite claim that. But anyway, you've got Ross going along, and his church is established, and it seems to be doing well. And then you get a guy who arrives later, me. I came to Olive Tree a little further down the line and missed the beginning. And I arrived, and I felt like I had a bit of a ministry. I wanted to preach as well. I was excited to be used by God. And so what happened is that I had to learn what was going on in this church. I had to understand the background. I had to make sure I really understood what Olive Tree believes. And whether we actually believed the same thing. And so Ross and I chatted at one stage, and we did believe the same thing. And then eventually I got the chance to have a ministry of my own up in Kloof, as you know. And so that's the context. We've had this conversation, Ross and I really respect Ross. I make sure that he agrees with the things I think I understand about the gospel. He says, go for it, you've got it. Launches me out into Kloof, and we start running our site up in Kloof. And because I know that I've had this conversation with Ross, I'm confident that I'm preaching the same gospel. And that means I think that I'm on the same page as Florida Road when I say you are welcome in this church, whether you are black, white, Indian, whatever. Your race has no impact here. Your background has no impact here. The sins you may or may not have committed have no impact. You are welcome here regardless. And as we see people encounter the love of Jesus and get saved, then regardless of how terrible those sins were in the past or how crazy their background might have been, we say, you're a new creation. Pull in. We want to find your gifting. We want to release your potential. And as people show themselves trustworthy, we release them into leadership capacities and all that sort of stuff. Because I'm going, well, I checked with Ross, and Olive Tree believes in grace. We believe that we can take anybody, no matter how bad their circumstance, and if the gospel reaches them, their lives will change. And that it doesn't matter how good or bad they've been. And that's what I'm preaching, having a great time. Kloof's going well. We're enjoying the fact that we believe the gospel of grace. And then Ross visits. And I'm going, well, this should be great, because Ross and I believe the same thing. And I notice Ross, who I respect, who's the leader, who started it all, and I'm just the sort of Johnny-come-lately, he pulls in, and yet I notice that this guy who I respect is starting to treat divorcees differently from people who aren't divorced. Or he starts to treat older folk with more respect than young people. You know, he doesn't seem to respect the young people. Or maybe I notice that he's got some racial bias, and I see him trying to put some kind of standard on people. I see him saying, well, you've behaved well, so you're going to get certain things from me, and you've behaved badly, and so you need to up your game. And I'm faced with this terrible moment where this guy who I respect, who everyone respects, who everyone wants to follow, is starting to shift people out of thinking about grace into thinking about something like law. That I need to have done this and this and this to be acceptable to God. And if I've done this and this and this, maybe that disqualifies me. And I have this hectic moment. And I don't know if I'd be brave enough to do what Paul does in Galatians, but this is what happens. Paul looks at Peter, this respected guy, who prior to that he'd had a conversation with, and they'd both believed the same thing. Peter had said to Paul, we're saved by grace. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or a Gentile. In other words, it doesn't matter if you're keeping the law or not. You need Jesus regardless. And once Jesus has saved you, then you are saved regardless, by grace. And Paul looks at Peter and goes, that's not okay. If we let performance sort of mingle in with the gospel, we're dead in the water. The church will not grow. In fact, Christians should be pitied above all people if in fact we don't believe that Jesus has, in rising from the dead, made us alive, regardless of how dead we were before, and through no effort of our own. That's core. And so Paul challenges Peter, and they have the showdown publicly. Hectic. And when you read that, I want you to really see the sort of intense moment, the courage that it took for Paul to stand up and contradict the founding father. What I've noticed about us is, we don't like having those kind of confrontational conversations. We're bad at them. We avoid them as far as possible. Or when we do them, we kind of just rush our way through them. But when we do them, whenever we do have those confrontational conversations, we still are more likely to have started it when we think we're in the right and someone else is in the wrong. Somehow that's easier for us. Think if that guy's doing badly at something that I'm doing quite well at, then there's a little bit of added motivation to have that confrontational conversation, because I get to go, hey, bud, I've noticed your language is slipping a little bit, and you're throwing in the odd dodgy word there, and I just feel that's not okay. And I'm kind of enjoying that conversation, really, because I get to look quite good out of it. Or, I've noticed how your money's being spent, or I noticed the way you're treating your wife. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be having those conversations as believers, but we're pretty okay with them when I get to look good and someone else gets to look bad. And Paul's going, that's not the point. In fact, anything that makes you feel proud of yourself and them feel ashamed of themselves, that's law. That's the thing Paul's going against. He's saying we're all sinners. We're all desperate. Peter, you, bud, even though you are a Jew, even though you're not a Gentile, you know that you can't live up to this law. You know you need Jesus. And that's what Paul's doing. I want you to read this and see all of that. See the tension and what's really at stake. Because this is a turning point. And the church then moves on going, we need to stand on grace properly, not grace tacked onto some other Jewish law. That just can't work. And we now live directly in that tradition. So this is an amazing moment for us as Olive Tree. Look at it, follow that conversation, and try and see where you would fit in it. Which side of that debate would you have been on in that moment? Enjoy.